Hey y'all, welcome back to the show. You know who it is. It's your boy Jay Henahan, and I'm back with another episode of How to Kill a Sacred Cow. Tonight on the podcast we have Ryan Musgrave-Evans. He's the author of Children of Orion, Finding the Cryptoterrestrials. Now, full disclosure, no pun intended, I'm a believer. I believe that aliens have been visiting planet Earth for a long time. How long is up for debate. Actually, all of the details and the particulars are up for debate, I believe, since there has been no official disclosure. Not that that would actually mean anything, because can you actually trust the government to disclose that they are inept and unable to actually protect us if these things are actually a threat? Now, also full disclosure, I don't believe that aliens are actually a threat, because they would have already killed us or enslaved us by now. Either that or they're just waiting for the right time. Whatever. Ryan Musgrave-Evans has been a lifelong experiencer. He has seen them ever since he was a child, and he also has been abducted by them for a very, very long time now. And he's written a book about it. It is very, very well written, and if anybody wants to pick up this book, which I highly encourage, it'll be not only in the show notes, but it will also be in the library section, in the guest books library section of the website. Any guest that I've ever had on the show who was an author, their book is there in the library section. It's a great way to help out the podcast, but it's also a great way to help out the guest. So Ryan, he has one of the most vivid and detailed descriptions of these, what he calls cryptoterrestrials, because they could be extraterrestrials, they could be cryptoterrestrials, they could be interdimensional beings. We don't exactly know, but he subscribes to the cryptoterrestrial theory mainly because of stuff that he's learned from them, and he's exchanged a lot of information with them. They have told him a lot, and basically they've told him that they want to use him as a conduit to get the message out, essentially, about them. Basically, these aliens are from the future, but on a parallel timeline. They're humanoids, at least their DNA is close enough to ours that they can interbreed with us. And the reason that they interbreed with us is because their DNA is so weak from manipulating it, whether that be for cosmetic or survival purposes and things like that, that they use humans to strengthen their DNA and get it back to something that can help them survive. And I don't want to give too much more away because I want you to listen to the show. And it was an incredible episode, just such a crazy ride. And he had an answer for every question I had, and which makes me believe him. I fully 100% believe him after speaking to him for about 2 hours. He blew me away. And I'm very happy to have him on the show. I'm definitely going to have him back on the show again sometime in the future. So if anybody would also like to help out the podcast in any other way, you can go to the How to Kill a Sacred Cow homepage. You'll find the donation button, the PayPal donation button. You'll also find the donate cryptocurrency button. Above those two buttons, you can find a subscription to Audible. And you can, like I said before, go to the library section of the How to Kill a Sacred Cow podcast and buy any book from any one of my guests, as well as suggested books. Now, without any further ado, Ryan Musgrave-Evans. Ryan, thanks a lot for coming on the show, man.
Hey, cheers. Thanks for having me, Jay. Good to be here, man.
Yeah, man, I was super excited to have you on, like we were talking about off air. We just appeared together on the Expanding Reality UFO Roundtable a couple of weeks ago, and I didn't recognize you because I had only heard your voice back in August when you were on Expanding Reality. And when you started to tell your story, when Brandon introduced an experiencer, I was like, oh, this is interesting. He didn't tell me he was going to have an experiencer on. And then you started to relate your story, and then it all hit me. I was like, oh no, this is the guy. I got to get him on there because I had a million questions when Brandon had you on the podcast, and I just thought this was a great opportunity. So, Ryan, once again, thanks a lot for coming on the show, man. And so let's kind of dig into the story. And when was it that you first experienced what you believe to be extraterrestrials or cryptoterrestrials or interdimensional beings. We can go into all that. But when did you first have your first experience?
Well, the first one, when I actually know exactly the age I was, I would have been a month off turning 5. I was about to turn 5. And the reason I know the exact age is because my sister was there at the time, and what we were doing was actually we were looking for a Christmas tree. And there's a local golf course nearby, and it was a tradition for me and the fam to wander down and cut a limb off a pine tree for the Christmas tree. So we were doing that a week before Christmas, and my sister, she actually knocked her eye on a stick while it was happening, and there was a bit of drama about that, and so she remembers the day really, really well. Now, she didn't see anything, but she does remember the day, so that's how I was able to really pinpoint the time. I have other memories other than that, and I'll go into that experience just in a sec. I have other memories as well from being around a similar age, but I'm not sure if any of them were earlier than that. But that particular experience was my brothers and sisters were down. They jumped over the fence. They were actually in the woods, the pine tree forest, along the edge of the golf course. And I was standing there with my mum just outside that property, and behind a pine tree that was only about 20, 30 foot away, maybe, there was something sticking its head out. So this is in broad daylight, middle of summer, summer in the Southern Hemisphere at that time of year. And it had a dark face, a long face that I thought at the time was like a triangular shaped face, and really long fingers wrapping around the side of the trunk of the tree. Fairly large pine tree, and big eyes, dark eyes. And I was like, Mum, what's that? She couldn't see it. She was like, I don't know what you're talking about. I went to the other side of the tree and peeked out again. She still couldn't see it. Its body, I could see part of the side of its body, and it looked like it was almost made out of the tree. It looked like it, and I've since come to understand that this is part of like a camouflage type technology, but where there was a continuation of the bark of the tree, sort of looked like it was on its flesh, or on the suit, really. It looked on one side of the tree, back in on the other side, and while it was still there looking at me, my brothers and sisters walked up and just walked past it and couldn't see it from behind the tree. So they should have been able to see it with it behind the tree on their side. Now, that particular image, that being, I have had encounters with the same thing since, and it is a kind of suit that these beings wear, that I have called a boas suit, Boas. I named it that after the case of Antonio Villas Boas in Brazil in the 1950s, where he saw beings dressed in dark suits, and other people in other cases through UFO law have reported similar suits and things like that as well. But so that's the first experience I had where I know the age I was, and that got me intensely interested in fairies and elves and like tree spirits, because I presumed that what I'd seen was something like that. And then I've had a lot of other experiences when I was a kid of waking up in the middle of the night and not being able to wake up my siblings and my parents, like they're completely asleep, unable to wake them, and felt drawn to go outside to see levitating people, glowing beings. Another time, a dark being that had like claws on its hands, like fake claws. I've come to understand that these are prosthetic like claws they wear sometimes. And even grabbed at one stage and taken away by a being that jumped off a structure, a boat that was in our front yard, a sailboat, and wrapped me up in what seemed like a bag, like a sack, and started running or levitating. I don't know, but there was like movement, and I'm in it, and I was screaming and yelling, and it stopped, opened the sack, and reached in its hand with these long fingers and stroked me, and then closed the sack again and kept going. For me to then to wake up at home with like missing time. Yeah, so that's some early kind of experiences that I had where I presumed that these beings were some kind of tree spirit or fairy or elf.
And so we're definitely going to get into more of these stories, some more of your experiences. But Why is it? Have they ever explained to you why they chose you? Is it anything that's been revealed to you, or has that been hidden from you?
Um, I have asked them that a lot. They don't really give a definitive explanation for that kind of thing. I have they have said that they've known me all my life. And there's one being that calls herself Branu, and she is about 6 foot tall. And these beings, when you see them without their suits, are what Charles James Hall would call tall whites. Like, I've read the Millennial Hospitality books by a guy called Charles Hall that claimed to have had prolonged and regular interaction with a group of tall, fair, slim beings when he was stationed as a weather observer at Nellis Air Force Base in the 60s. When I read his book, I was like, these are the same beings, even down to chirping and growling and making hooting sounds and things like that, sort of like wildlife sounds, which I've come to understand are like a camo cant, I call it, like camouflage language, where they mimic wildlife. They also have natural language that sounds more like our languages, which to my ears sort of strikes my ears as sounding a bit Japanese or Korean or something like that, but which isn't Japanese or Korean, but of course, but sounds sort of like that, and it's monosyllabic and comes out. They speak from their chests, sort of like the quintessential samurai sort of sound, sort of like a deep throated, a deep resonant, throwing out the syllables and whatnot. But yeah, the reasons for them having this interaction with me, I am not 100% sure. They tell me, like I said, that they've known me all my life, but they don't really talk about why they've singled me out in any way. And I suspect lots of people have interactions with them. But if there's anything special about me, it's that they let me remember more. I think they interact with a lot of people all the time throughout the world, but they can mess with your memory, of course. They apologized to me about that. They said, we apologize for the mesmerization, they called it, and we apologize for memory alteration. And when they're being covert, you wouldn't even know they were there because their suits can becoming completely invisible. And they can also morph, like they can become intangible. So they can pass through walls when they're wearing these suits, things like that as well. Nuts and bolts technologies, but so robust that it seems like magic to us, or spiritual, or something like that. But they're flesh and blood beings, which is something they've said to me as well. They said, we are flesh and bone. We are much more physical than you would think. But the reason, I'm not sure. But you see, they claim to be able to see potential realities in the future with technologies. So they have prophetic technologies that they use to see potential futures. And so that can mean that some of their choices at the moment can seem irrational or absurd, but they might be thinking in the long game. And in that sense, they sort of pilot reality, in the sense that, like piloting a research project or piloting a new TV show. They've already set up and practiced how events are going to transpire, potential events in the future, before they act now. So they're thinking many steps ahead of us. They can see around corners in that sense. And if they choose someone to interact with, that person might seem an unlikely candidate to be having experiences for whatever reason. But the logic might be because the fruit of this will be, will come to bear decades from now, or even centuries, or whatever. So I'm not 100% sure. They did tell me, when I had an experience with them, when I was camping in Dandenong Ranges in Belgrave, and the Dandenong Ranges in Victoria. So there's big national parks there that have these huge, beautiful eucalypt trees. Eucalyptus regnans, the huge 300 foot tall, 400 foot tall trees. It's wonderful stuff there. But I've camped in there a few times. And one time when I camped in there, I saw what I've come to understand were probably orbs. At the time, I didn't really have the terminology for this kind of thing. I was like, there's lights in the trees. They running around my tent and putting their hands on my tent. The big long hands they have, especially the adults, really long fingers with a sort of like a split in the middle and a short thumb, like a what would you call it? Like a vestigial sort of thumb further up their hand. And they said to me then, we will hold you to a bargain. And that was because I'm sort of saying this out of order at the moment, but when I'd first gone out to camp, I'd been trying to make contact with fairies because I'd been studying the Celtic fairy faith. And I'd been thinking these beings I've been having interactions with since I was a kid were probably fairies or elves or something. So that, awakened in me like a serious passion for the Celtic fairy faith and Gaelic mythology and Gaelic language and all that kind of stuff. And I'd said, hey, I'll help you guys out in any way. And I was into druidry and Wicca and neo-paganism and things like that. And I said, I'd like to make contact with you, and sort of projected that thought out into the world when I was going into the forest, and thought this looks like a place where they'd have an underground habitation, this beautiful, huge national park. And then they said to me, we'll hold you to the bargain. And then many years later, so just like about 7 or 8 years ago, 9 years ago, maybe, they said to me again, we'll hold you to that bargain. And I think it was to do with writing books, a lot of it as well, where I'd said to them, why don't you just write your own books, and use a pseudonym? Why do you need me to do that? Surely, that's not the most efficient way of doing it. And they're like, oh, no, we have to do it this way. You humanize the message. And anyway, so, and they seem to want people to know that they exist now. At different stages in history, people have known they exist and had interactions with them and relationships with them that are much more open, like the Gaelic fairy faith, Celtic fairy faith, for instance, where people knew in the past that there were other beings, other people that lived in the earth that had magical powers that could put glamours on you and make themselves appear to be things that they weren't, and put you into weird trances and act like poltergeist-like beings and move things around your house, playing tricks on you, kill cattle if you grazed cattle too close to their underground habitations and all this kind of stuff, and how to placate them and avoid trespass against them and all that kind of stuff. And then I think probably the jinn of pre-Islamic Arab world, very similar kinds of beings and explanations and descriptions as well. And they probably, the Arabic people in olden days probably knew very well these beings were there. But we've sort of forgotten nowadays, But I think they want us to remember and to have more open discourse with us again.
So where are you on these? How ancient do you think these beings are? Do you think they move through time, or they've just been here that long? Like they're kind of set up here for the purpose of observing and whatever they're here for. And do you think that they are maybe some of the ancient aliens that like maybe the kind of Zecharia Sitchin type of model, or some of the other ancient alien models that exist out there?
I think they are an explanation for most of the different, like, disparate theories for what's behind the UFO phenomenon. They're sort of like a theory of everything, like a toe, in a sense, that they are, in a sense, a future version of ourselves. But that depends on what you mean by time travel, because the way they move through time is to almost like hijack parallel timelines. So they're not actually traveling into their own past. They haven't traveled into their own past. They've travelled into an alternative timeline that is, for all intents and purposes, identical to the way their one was millennia earlier. They're originally from the Earth. They have unravelling genetic structures. They need to be constantly interbreeding with, well, not constantly, but they need to fairly routinely, with their new generations, take on board some of our genetic information, because they have their genomic systems are unraveling, impoverished, largely to do with deliberate genetic engineering on their part, where they've deliberately been trying to lengthen their lifespans change their appearance and all this kind of stuff. And there's all these side effects that have manifested, and some of them are it's a difficulty with healing, where if they're damaged, it takes them their bodies a lot longer to heal. But also there's certain viruses and diseases and bacteria and things like that wreak havoc on their system. And they couldn't fix these things, so they came back. In a sense, they came back. In another sense, they stepped sideways into another world where there were versions of themselves at a much earlier period of our history, who they are now, I'd say they're not parasitic, it's sort of symbiotic in the sense that they also assist the Earth now and try to, well, they're always looking forward and trying to choose, not only for their own best advantage, but also for a mutual advantageous scenarios in the future and things like that. So it's sort of, some people sort of think it's parasitic because they wander around through our world at night, covertly interacting with us, taking our genes and things like that, even having intercourse with us, like Peter Curie in Sydney in the 90s and Antonio Villas Boas in Brazil. There's a close enough genetic affiliation for them to be able to interbreed with us in the old-fashioned kind of way. But they're kind of future, so they're future versions of us. But then they went into our ancient past, and they've been here for millennia as a kind of an alternative version of us. So not really a sister species, but perhaps you could say more a daughter species of us, although it sort of gets a bit incestuous because they're constantly taking from our genes again. I think the idea of ancient aliens is probably connected with them as well as an ancient presence in the Earth and also on the Moon and on Mars and things like this. So the ancient aliens hypothesis, it can explain, the idea that perhaps the UFO phenomenon is related to time-traveling humans. It gets there as well. Interdimensionals, well, yes, they're interdimensionals too, because that's what time-traveling is, or at least the way they do it. And so a lot of different things come to play here. And they cryptoterrestrials, Mac Tony's coined the term cryptoterrestrial, hidden earthlings, as an alternative to the extraterrestrial hypothesis. He said, they may be indigenous humanoids. Well, yes, they are indigenous to the Earth as well. But are they extraterrestrials? Well, in a sense, they're extraterrestrials too, because they've spent such a long period of time interstellar, extrasolar. So there's a couple of there's 4 different races, but one of them, the one that how I have interactions with, call themselves Orion. Well, they call themselves Mudjana or Munjana. I'm not sure what that means. I'm fairly certain it means people of Mana, which is either their star or their planet, but I'm not 100% sure of these linguistic things at the moment. But the middle star of Orion's belt, Al-Nalam, they spent a huge amount of time there. They left Earth, and they've returned to their ancient Earth. So in a sense, you could call them extraterrestrials as well. So this idea sort of covers a lot of bases. And there's probably a few other theories and possible explanations that people have put forward as to what is behind the UFO and ET presence that is kind of relevant to them too. Fairies, elves, are they angels or demons? And people talk about this kind of thing. And in my opinion, a lot of the, so that's something you hear a lot about online. People are saying aliens are really demons, or they're angels, or they're blah blah blah. It's like, well, in a sense, yes, because I would suggest that our ideas of demons and angels is a cultural interpretation of their presence again anyway. Especially, the way people in pop culture think of angels looking and the way they think of demons looking. The stereotypical idea of an angel is some sort of tall, levitating, glowing being, maybe with fair hair, fair skin, big blue eyes. Well, sometimes they present themselves like that, especially when they're in their luminous suits. But then when they're wearing these dark boa suits that have like a large nose appendage hanging down the front, goggles with eyes that glow red at night, prosthetic claws on their hands, and they bark and growl and roar, and creep about and become invisible or look like shadow people. It's their presence, in my opinion, explains not all the paranormal phenomena, but a lot of it. All through ghosts, even to the sense that sometimes they mimic other people that you know in a doppelganger kind of way, but even people that you used to know that are now deceased. Whatever will put you into a more comfortable state of mind, like if they have to interact with you for any reason.
Or if
So
they
sometimes
if they think you can't handle it and they need to put you
Yeah.
at ease.
Yeah, so I think it's just a lot of ghost phenomenon is them, and certainly poltergeist activity. They thrive on tricking people, and it depends on what kind of relationship they have with people. Like sometimes they can play dirty, and the Skinwalker Ranch case, in my opinion, is them. They must have an underground habitation there somewhere. And they didn't want that family there. If like the they call the Gormans the family in the book, but that's a pseudonym. I think I can't remember their real name at the moment. But anyway, doesn't really matter. But if they want to move, expel, or repel people from a place, if they've decided the people aren't, they don't appreciate those people being there, they can read your mind with technologies. If they decide that a person has dogs, which they can often consider a threat to their children, or the person has firearms or designs on like hunting in the forests nearby or trapping animals, or just generally has sort of like negative, malicious, aggressive intent as far as the cryptoterrestrials are concerned, they can try to move those people on by scaring them, by moving around their houses, by shifting and playing tricks on them, moving the frying pan off the table and putting it in the freezer, or putting your bowl of cereal in the microwave, and tapping you and pushing you, or attacking your dogs. And they're known to kill dogs. They don't like dogs. They're a bit uncomfortable around animals altogether. They don't keep pets. They don't have that as part of their cultural makeup, where Homo sapiens keep pets. And they don't have much of a sense of humor about dogs, wild dogs or domesticated dogs, and they slash the throats of dogs. Like John Keel has talked about in the Mothman prophecies and things like that. He mentions about how UFO flaps can coincide with domesticated dogs being found with their throats cut. That's a parallel that's them, where they, dogs have preternatural senses in some ways compared to humans, and when CTs are cloaking and on some kind of mission, trying to be covert, dogs, pesky things, can, experience them, perceive them when they prefer not to be noticed. But also, if they're attacked by dogs, they have no sense of humor about it, and they can kill them. I mean, at Skinwalker Ranch as well, an orb that was chased by dogs, it reduced the dogs to piles of cinders. So they can play dirty. They're not really good or evil. They're sort of like us. They just have different kinds of individuals. Some of them are more agreeable than others. Run the whole gamut of different personality types, from the cruelest to the most compassionate. And they have a military system. They have an army, and some of their military can be vicious individuals, cold individuals. But then they also have a priestly class, more compassionate beings. They have their own kind of spiritual beliefs, which are more comparable maybe to sort of like Eastern forms of mysticism or something like that, some sort of like Hindu or Buddhistic kinds of ideas that we have as Homo sapiens is probably the closest to their way of seeing the world. But yeah, anyway, sorry, I'm rambling a bit now, dude. Just pull me back in line.
No, I
train me back in.
This is my big thing on the show is I let my guests talk. You know what I mean? I want to hear the story out, or hear the argument out, and I had to hold myself back from from interrupting a few times because you touched on several things that I have many, many questions about. So first of all, you said that they have trouble repairing their DNA or with healing because they have manipulated their DNA so much over the past over their existence. And so have they? I guess the first question would be: Have you contacted with them over the past couple of years? Anytime before that or since, have they expressed any concern with our own genetic manipulation? Or are they favorable to it? Has there been any discussion about that?
They're not favorable to it, as far as I can tell, because for them, the whole the reason that they came back here is because we are products of natural selection hewn by millions of years. That's what we've got going for us in their eyes. And so they wish to return to that or something like that, at least to augment themselves with some more of that. That's what we have to offer. So, yeah, the idea that we are on the cusp of making the same kinds of mistakes that they did is not a good thing in their eyes. So I don't know to what extent they'd be able to or interfere with us and stop us from going down that road, or I'm not quite sure. There's a lot of us, of course, billions of us, and they have access to us as kind of free-range, archaic versions of themselves that are just living in the world, and they just move around and tap into that. I'm not quite sure what kind of population they require really for that to still have effect for them and be beneficial to them. As long as there are some parts of our population, Homo sapiens population, that are still fairly pure in the sense that aren't genetically modified too much, maybe they don't require all of us, to be natural, as it were. But they've also, as well as genetically manipulating themselves, they've also had, I think, natural. Well, there've been mutations that they've had for different reasons over the time that they've been. The tens of thousands of years would separate us from them in time, and they are more like us than the others as well in appearance and also still genetically, where they can kind of pass as long as they're wearing heavy enough coats, big glasses, and also as long as they're not too old, because the really old members of their race can get quite tall, which will then stick out in public. But they can kind of pass it, especially if they've got what I call telepath tech. They're wearing it, and the females can wear them under wigs, and they can still be mentally manipulating you to suggest to you to not notice odd aspects of themselves, like not to notice the weird shape of their hands, and to sort of, do the Jedi mind trick, I suppose, there's nothing to see here kind of thing. Whereas the other races are much less like us in appearance, even though they're still essentially human. Yeah.
And so another aspect I wanted to talk about, I'm glad you kind of brought it back to this, would be some of the clothes that they wear. Now, you've said that they have several technical augmentations, and so that's for vision. For what are some of the things that they wear for that? Do they have different, for lack of a better word, I'm not trying to make light of the situation, but do they have different outfits, and do they serve different purposes, or are there just a few different types in their uniform?
Yeah, well, their main outfit that they wear when they're away from their underground habitations is the suit I was talking about. It covers them fully. It's kind of like a wetsuit almost, with a helmet with a piece that comes over the nose. And that is for, I'm quite sure, I'm not 100% sure, but I'm fairly convinced that is for acoustics, like manipulating sound and amplifying sounds, because they make all these different interesting, wonderful sounds that can travel massive distances, like roars and whoops and all this kind of stuff. but that thing can come off, and it looks like a nose. And some of them have different shapes, but most of them are sort of look like a sort of flares out a bit, and it goes up over their forehead as a lump, and that whole section can come off. And then they wear under that like some kind of breathing device. But apparently they can breathe our atmosphere. That's fine, other than there are allergens. If they have like dust and mites and pollen and things like that, can wreak havoc with their lungs, and they have allergic reactions and things like that. So that can be for that kind of thing, depending on the time of year and all that kind of stuff and what's present in the atmosphere. And these goggles they wear as well, they glow red at night, and I presume that that's something to do with night vision. But now they're medics, which I've seen a fair few times, wear either skin tight white outfits or like a, what would you call it? Like you can imagine like a Nazi, like the image of like a Nazi scientist in the Second World War or something, like the scrubs, but the skirt, the whole sort of like an apron kind of thing. Sometimes they wear something like that, but I've also seen them just in like skin tight, usually with something over their mouths with black lenses. So they normally have, so their eyes are quite a bit larger than ours. They have blue irises. Some of them, as they get older, get pink, start to develop purple irises, and then it goes to pink. And it's the males, I'm fairly sure, is that Charles Hall says it's the males that do that. I'm fairly sure it's just the males that do that as well, that have this change in their eyes. But when they're in a situation where they're performing operations or procedures, they have black eyes. So they have some kind of these lenses, and I've seen them with one in and one out as well. And now I'm presuming that's some kind of smart tech, that this is telling them information about what's in front of them, about the patient or the situation or whatever. And then they also wear a cap over the top of their hair when they're doing that as well. In that kind of situation, that's where I had the theory, came up with the idea that mantis beings may be misinterpreted elderly Mudgeonor medics as well. Because when they get older, their shoulders get quite hunched, their heads stick out more like out of their chest as they develop issues with their bones, and they can't walk as well as they could before, and they sort of their spines get a curvature to them, and then they have these incredibly long hands which they hold up like that. They hold up sort of and kind of look like mantis hands or insect hands in a way. And their faces get very long. As they get older and they age, they get taller, but their faces also get longer, and they develop like heavy pointed chins. Whereas when they're younger, their faces are much more rounded. But and so these long, thin faces with a mask over the mouth, mask over the hair, but still the same color as the skin, which is like chalk white, paper white. Long hands, hunched over, incredibly painfully thin. They look like giant pale mantises. And that's where I think perhaps they're the explanation behind another alleged race of aliens, that they can appear to be tall black aliens. They can appear, sometimes I think they're called tall greys. Sometimes they're called mantises, depending on how they're presenting themselves. Now, and also because they take a long time to age, take a long time to grow, they can be, 4 foot tall and be like 20, 25 years old. They could be like 5 foot tall and be about 50 years old. By the time they get to about 100 years old, they're sort of like about 6 foot or maybe a little bit less. Another couple of 100 years go by and they hit another window of growth and they shoot up again and they keep shooting up. They can get hundreds and hundreds of years old and get really, really tall, like 9 foot tall. But they can be adults. They can be adults by our standards and be very small. And so I think sometimes when they're seen, and it's the younger, like adolescents that are seen, people presume they're not tall whites again. They presume they're greys or whatever, But if you hear them barking and growling and chirping and things like that, it's definitely them. But anyway, so they present themselves in lots of different kinds of ways, and also as shadow people. I'm convinced that if maybe not all shadow people are them, but I think that they are probably the reason behind a lot of sightings that people would call shadow people, because while they're cloaking, sometimes they're still casting a shadow, or they'll sort of look like a dark haze. It's almost a little bit like Predator, in the old Predator series franchise movies, where you got that kind of like a distorted sort of heat haze look. Sometimes they'll have that kind of look to them. Sometimes you wouldn't know they were there at all. And there was one experience I had when I was running in a state park nearby to where I lived. And while I was running, I stopped. This is during the day, and it was a cold day. And I have this thing going on. It's a weird thing. I don't know. Some other people get it, but I think it's because I just sweat a lot or something. But I have this thing where if I'm running a lot and it's a cold day and I stop, I'll have steam pouring off me, right? And I heard a voice in the middle of my head, because they can use like a linguistic communication that feels like linguistic, like they're words, but they're silent words that are almost tangible in a sense. And the whole sentence will be expressed, but in a shorter period of time than you could actually articulate that sentence. If you were going to say something in English, to take, you say, I am sitting in a room, takes a certain amount of time to express that sentence. It hits you like a packet so that you somehow hear it, but it's expressed incredibly fast. And a voice said to me, "What is that?" And I said, "Oh," and I realized I felt that something was watching me. And I said to myself in my head, "That is just me. I think I sweat a lot. I don't know, but like I got steam pouring off me. It's this weird thing that happens to me on cold days if I'm exerting myself." And they said, "That's creepy." And I thought, and then I thought that was funny. And then I said, "Where are you?" And they said, I think they said there's 7. They said there's 7 of us standing behind you right now. And I turned around and I could see absolutely nothing. And then over to one side, one of them started like moving and the tree started shimmering. And then I can't remember what happened. I can't remember if I started running home or if I've got something missing there, I think. So I'm not 100% sure why sometimes their cloaking can be 100% effective and then sometimes less so. And it may have something to do with whether they're moving or not. It becomes less effective maybe if they're starting to move. But they present themselves in lots of different ways, and I think have given rise to huge amounts of different, like taxons or whatever you call it, like the taxonomy in ufology of all the different kinds of races and beings, especially in internet UFO folklore online, where there's all these different kinds of races and they're from here and from there, blah, blah, blah. I think a lot of them are caused by this one race. And of course, there are other races, but this one race is responsible for a lot of the mythology of different kinds of beings, in my opinion. But yeah.
So have they talked to you about what they think of the other races? Is it kind of like have you ever read Behold a Pale Horse, Bill Cooper?
I've never read that. I've watched that dude do presentations and things like that. But so I'm not 100% of the races he talks about. I think he talks about something about a big-nosed greys or something like that. And I was thinking, I wonder whether he's gotten information about their suits, because their suits look like they've got big noses, but it's not them, They have, I do know what they think of or have thought of some of the other races. There's one race that they are closely allied with that are called the Sebetjana. And I'm pretty sure, again, although not 100% sure, although I'm trying to become 100% sure of these things to do with their language, I'm pretty sure that Sebet means either the planet that the Sebetjana are from or the system, the name of the sun or suns. Zeta Reticuli is Sebet, and I think Dina, I'm pretty sure Dina is people. So Sebetjana is one group, and the Madjana or Manajina is the tall whites, the ones I've been talking about for the most part. So the tall whites are from Alun-Alum, or spent time in Alun-Alum. They're all originally from Earth, which Alun-Alum's the middle star in Orion's belt. But the Sebetjana are Zeta Reticuli, and there are a couple of different races of them depending on what time in their own history they're visiting us. So one race is grey looking, and I think is responsible for a lot of talk about greys. Whereas the other race that is 7,000 from a different time to them, like the same race but further on again, 7,000 years more or something like that, they look very similar. They sort of look like a grey, but they're brown. They have heavier ridges across the top of their skull as well. 4 long fingers without a thumb at all, with claws. And I'm fairly sure that one of the fingers, though, is actually a migrated thumb. That it is actually they have a thumb and 3 fingers, but that one of the thumbs is sort of moved up. And they're quite short. They're about 4 foot tall, 4 foot tall. Scaly skin. They're the beings from the Varginha incident in Brazil from the 90s, the brown, oily-skinned creatures. When they're in their suits, they are like they have their own, what I call a version of a boa suit, which is a large head with like ears, because they don't actually have, like the Mudgena have ears. The tall whites have ears, even though they're smaller than ours. But the Sebetjana don't actually have external ears, which can cause issues with them telling what direction noises are coming from. They've gone for such a long time without really requiring much in the way of hearing ability, because they have telepathic abilities that are genetically engineered, biological, into their heads and things like that. But for communication and stuff. But so what they do is they have these helmets that have these interesting looking sort of like bat-like ears on them. So these are the beings that were seen in those suits, seen in the Hopkinsville goblins, in the Kentucky goblins, the beings, the glowing, levitating beings that had long arms and clawed hands, but they're quite short, 3 to 4 foot tall, with these weird heads that were actually a helmet with these eyes, and like the top of the helmet comes off with so there's like a line there, and these big ears that assist so that they can actually, because they're out in the world and they're having to interact with this kind of environment where there's animals and there's people and there's insects and there's lots of different stuff going on. Through artificial means, they've given themselves ears again. So there's those two races are closely allied, the little brown ones and the tall whites. And then there was another lot called, they'd be Sebetjana as well, I suppose. They're from the same place, but earlier in their history. But they're not approved of by those two races. And then there's another race again, which is pale grey, can get up to 5 foot tall, much larger craniums. These ones don't have black eyes. Those other two races have blacked out eyes. These ones have irises that can be either brown or blue, I think. And they look more like Skinny Bob, like the Skinny Bob video, where you see they're being like more like Megamind or something like that, like the character Megamind, with a really big cranium, much larger than the other races. Large hands with 3 heavy fingers with slight claws, and a large thumb. The Steve Boucher aliens, Steve Boucher, the Canadian, that was abducted when he was a kid in a band. And he's written a book recently about, I can't remember what it's called now. Anyways, that's those beings as well. And I think they're called greys sometimes. That's the sort of misleading name. The term grey, in my opinion, is a real misnomer. I think all of those 4 races have been called greys at different stages by different people. Yeah, so, and those guys, I know those guys. Okay, those guys, the guys, they're called P-24s, another kind of future human. They were in the Roswell crash and a few other different crashes around the same time. Steve Boucher met those beings. They don't approve at all of the Sebetjana and the Mudgena, and don't really think that they should be here interfering with us in the way that they are. And their future, like, it gets quite complicated, but they're not as far into the future as those other ones are. But anyway, so yeah, they don't all approve of each other. I'm fairly certain, without being 100% sure, that there's only two left anyway. The Sabegina and the Mudgina, I'm pretty sure, are the only two races left. Now, the idea that there may be true aliens without a genetic history to the Earth that have evolved elsewhere, that aren't just simply future versions of ourselves or interdimensional versions of ourselves, but have an evolutionary history completely different to us, that are advanced and sophisticated technologically, that are visiting Earth. The Mudgina don't talk about them, and I don't really know about that kind of thing. I suspect that if those kinds of beings exist, they're not that interested in us. It's the reason that these other beings interact with us and are interested in us is because they are us and require things from us. Yeah, anyway, there you
go. Yeah, man, no, this is absolutely fascinating. And like I said, I got a million more questions. So, all right. Have the Mudgina spoken about maybe any type of physical conflict with any other of these races, or maybe the other ones that they're allied? Have they spoken with any other conflict? And is it interdimensional conflict, or is it like conflict over resources? If any of that does go on,
I think there may have been. I'm not sure though, but I think there may have been conflict between the dark grey ones and the other two allied ones, the brown and the white, that they have come into conflict with each other at certain stages. They have also come into conflict with us at certain stages for different reasons. I think just us coming, like our military coming too close to some of their underground habitations, and there being conflict. They can be. You see, this is the thing with these beings, that people want to label things as being good and evil all the time. Like, it's very simple and easy to just have two baskets and say, are they the good guys or are they the bad guys? And it's like, well, what are we? Like, what are Homo sapiens? Are we the good guys or the bad guys? Well, I would think some of us are one way inclined, some the other. Or then it depends a lot on what you mean by good or bad. We seem to be very bad for the rest of the biosphere at the moment, with our kinds of technologies that we have at the moment that are really ripping the guts out of our planet, and destroying biodiversity and all this kind of stuff. We pretty much suck. So when people say, are they good guys or bad guys, quite often what they mean is, are they friendly to us? Do they want to harm Homo sapiens? And I think the answer to that for the Mudgina and the Sabegina is, because they are here again permanently and they consider this planet to very much be theirs. We're sharing it with each other. If we misbehave and destroy too much of the biosphere and the equilibrium, we could become a threat to their existence in their eyes. Now, they need us to, because they can't seem to come up with any permanent solutions to their genomic issues other than returning to constantly, reinvigorate themselves with us. But they are in a way suffering us, our presence, we have come into conflict before, and I think I'm quite sure about this. In fact, they have mentioned this kind of thing to me before. I don't know how often it happens, but I'm quite certain that it does happen sometimes, is that they kill us sometimes in national parks, and that the missing 411 phenomenon is partly related to them sometimes. Especially, when David Paulides, and he talks about the missing 411, and he has different categories of people going missing in national state parks and wilderness areas and things like that. And he might say, athletes, ultra marathon runners and things like that might be some category that often go missing, or academics and scientists and physicists and things like that, or children, or hunters. Now, the category of hunters is an issue where some hunters of ours are killed by them. If a person is considered to have aggressive and malicious intent and has a deadly weapon, stuff can hit the fan, especially if they think that their kids are in trouble. If a hunter just sees something breaking through the trees and then automatically goes to aim their weapon, they're dead. If there's an adult mudgeonner nearby, that person's gone. That's the end of them. And then what do they do with the body? Well, I don't know. Some of them move them distances. They make sure it's never found, or whatever. And they can be incredibly lethal in situations like that. And they don't necessarily admire us. They don't think much of our species as a whole. They can read our minds. They know what we think. They have they're sort of highly strung, I suppose you'd say. They have an incredibly vivid emotional life. So, it's a bit of a cliche in ufology to talk about how greys or certain alien beings seem to be robotic or lacking in emotional lives, and that maybe that's what they want from us. They're investigating how we seem to have, rich emotional tapestry and all that kind of stuff. Well, the opposite is true here with the tall whites, where the tall whites have an incredibly rich, almost unpredictable emotional life, where they'll flip from being angry to sad to disappointed to ecstatic much faster than we would have emotions flipping around. And also they have depth of emotions that we don't have. So they even, to them, they ask philosophical questions about whether Homo sapiens really can love. Because to them, their ideas of love are much deeper and profound than our ideas of love. And they look at us and say, we don't care about our children. They look at us and they say, we don't care about our down and out people. They look at our communities and they see people living on the streets. To them, this is just unthinkable. And, they have a completely different system. They don't use money. They just share goods and services. And whatever is required at the time, people just take it and use it. And now, so that they're weirded out by our ideas of money. There's sort of like abstract ideas about placing worth on things like that, and also that children can be on the streets and living on the streets, and that other Homo sapiens will simply walk past them without helping them, without trying to work out if they've got somewhere to sleep that night. All this kind of stuff. They look at us and think that, for the most part, as a race, that we are incredibly callous, cold, unfeeling beings, motivated, selfish kinds of beings, and things like that. They don't really think a huge, have a good opinion of us. Having said that, they interact with certain individuals. They don't necessarily, sometimes I don't know whether some of them like me. I think some of them don't. One of the guards said to me once, "Mama likes you." Mama is what the guards call Brano, a female. That seems to have a lot of authority. She claims to be the same being that is in Charles Hall's books that he called the Teacher. I have no reason to doubt her. She says that's her, but she calls herself Brano. So now, they call her Mama. And one of the guards said to me, "Mama likes you. We don't even know why she likes you." Like, not all of them like me, and sometimes they have vicious senses of humor as well. And they've played tricks on me and things like that. And some of them will, rebuke the others for doing that and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, so I'm not necessarily liked that much either. I kind of see myself as probably being some kind of tool to them, because they have a certain plan that's being acted out, and they've decided at this point in history, we'll get this guy to talk about us a bit, and it might not even have any real effect or influence on the world until like 50 years from now, if someone rediscovers my books, or like I don't know what their long plan is, you know. So yeah, I'm not claiming to be anything special in that regard. I think the Branu does genuinely like me, but some of them don't. And it's that kind of thing where they look at us and they think, they have a different way of seeing the world. And one of they're alien, I suppose, in a sense, you know. They're really, they have a different way of seeing the world, and it's not really comparable to our way of seeing the world. And sometimes we surprise them in a good way, but for the most part, they're not really happy with us. Yeah.
And so, have they said anything in regards to our religions, or if they had interceded at any time, and like kind of the same way that you said, was her name Branu?
Yeah.
Said that I'm the teacher in this guy's book. Have they mentioned anything about their influence in ancient cultures and their teachings finding their way into books, or are they not even interested in helping humanity along in an evolutionary sense?
I think they do tinker, and they have done in the past. As for our religions and spiritualities and things, I think unknowingly they may have given rise to a lot of our religious or spiritual beliefs by being present and being like an empirical reality that then we try to explain by manufacturing narratives and stories, you know, to explain their presence. And then we get quite creative, and you know, humans are storytelling animals, and we get a bit carried away. Even though a lot of our religious systems and stuff, I think, are based on their presence, but not necessarily them going out of their way to force some kind of belief system on us, just as a consequence of them being here and having had been here for so long. And also, I think with some of their telepathic communication, because when they're wearing these helmets that I call like telepath tech, Charles Hall called them electronics, where they're no, this particular race, the tall whites, the Mudgeonah, they're no more or less naturally telepathic or psychic than we are, but they rely on these technologies, and it takes a lot of training for them from when they're children to be able to use it properly, to influence people or animals, or to also just communicate in pictures and abstract ways or linguistically. And I think sometimes they can shut you out from hearing their thoughts, but sometimes if there's a group of them in an area, there becomes what I sort of think of as being an umbrella of thought, which means that you can hear them communicating with each other even though they're not trying to communicate with you. And that can create an echo where you hear them thinking about something, you think about it, then they start thinking about you thinking about that thing, and then you're thinking about them, and it sort of builds up exponentially until it gets really confusing. But then sometimes this can also be in images, and there can be sort of like obsessive images coming back into your head because they're projecting an image to one of their own people over there in your vicinity that you've picked up. And then in that kind of way, you'll think of it, and then you might become afraid and think of something scary. They pick up on your thought and send that straight back to you. And then that becomes greater, and you start to become more stressed. I think this is probably what happened to that couple in the Mojave Desert. Not sure if you're familiar with, or your audience are familiar with, the Mojave incident. I think a guy, Ron Felber, was the guy who wrote the book, who researched it, about a couple that were camping out in the Mojave Desert, and they saw a craft land, and then there was this sea of red eyes, and all of these small beings, which would have been their children in the boa suits, came running towards them, and they put them on it. They locked them in their camper and wouldn't let them out of it. And then there started to be sounds like they were drilling, or they were mining, like the Cryptoterrestrials were mining. Now, these people were subjected to nightmarish visions while this was happening, where they had all of these religious experiences, and they were imagining old memories in their lives that they were ashamed of, or negative thoughts. Or the guy was a hunter, I think. So then he was being shown images of himself being hunted, and they kept having these sort of like obsessive thoughts and religious thoughts as well, and sort of religious visions and all this kind of stuff, but all based on their own existing belief system. Sort of, and they could, as they got more and more upset, this couple, they noticed that the beings around them were reacting to it and becoming sort of agitated. And so, in my opinion, this was an example of humans being present while hundreds of cryptoterrestrials are communicating with each other telepathically and creating this umbrella that people just can't really deal with if you just happen to be close. And they locked them on board their camper. And every once in a while, luminous, larger beings would come down, and there'd be like a gas pumped into the camper. But the gas seemed to be something like an anesthetic or some kind of drug that calmed them. Like they were trying to calm the people, but they weren't going to stop the mining operation just for them. So there was this sort of, so the situation is just incredibly messy. And in my opinion, what happened is they were probably not supposed to be there. The cryptoterrestrials stumbled across them because they decided to just be there, I think, on a whim. And they had this mining operation to do, which was important. But now, in my opinion, this is where religions are born, like as well, like, or spiritual thoughts and reality, like adding new ideas to our culture from the beings themselves, or your own ideas thrown out and projected back to you, and your own fears projected back to you, and then sending out a question and it being answered or repeated, and all this kind of stuff is perhaps how some of the more colorful religious concepts throughout our history have developed as well, where the cryptoterrestrials are not necessarily trying to influence our belief systems, but they do it anyway, and maybe sometimes they deliberately do that as well. Now, this is related to this, actually. Yeah, there's one experience I had again when I was out running. I was out running and I was having this thought, which is a pretty childish thought. I'm a bit embarrassed about it, actually. While I was out running, I was imagining, this was about 10 years ago, maybe. I'm not quite sure how long it was. I was imagining what I would do with an elven army, with an army of like elfin warriors to set the world straight and take out all the bad guys, right? Whatever that means, And I was running along, and then I was imagining craft in the sky, and that they were attacking walls and knocking things down. And a voice said to me, "Oh, that's what we did for the Macedonian," right? And I was like, I only know one Macedonian, and that's Alexander the Great.
Yep.
And then I was thinking, well, that doesn't necessarily mean they meant him. But I looked it up online, and I found reference to Alexander the Great attacking cities and there being flying shields. I think at one stage he was fighting another army, and flying shields came and shot lasers and scared both the armies away. But another time he was attacking a city, and allegedly flying shields knocked down the walls for him, or something like that. I mean, I'm not quite sure also, how legitimate these histories are, but I decided to look into that online, and I was thinking, oh, that's interesting. So I wonder whether they did mean Alexander the Great. I mean, they may not have, but that's the only, that immediately my mind went there. But if they have done things like that, like that's genuine, real interference, the Star Trek, Prime Directive has been thrown out the window there. If they're actually sometimes aligning themselves with certain armies or militaries or kingdoms or states, and making sure that other groups are taken out to alter history in that kind of way, that's a possibility.
Yeah, immediately I think of two different authors. I think of Isaac Asimov and Philip K. Dick. And so Philip K. Dick had a great short story, and I can't remember the name of it right now. It was one of his like medium-sized short stories, and there were one of the like the elite group of militarists on a planet. They were trying to wage a nuclear war with another alien species, and they had this computer program AI where they would run the probabilities, the future probabilities, and whether an invasion or an attack was favorable at this or that time. There were people tinkering with that. So I was thinking of that earlier when you were talking about that these beings could they could estimate future possibilities. And another one that I was thinking of was Isaac Asimov. So this book is called The End of Eternity. Have you ever heard of this one?
I've heard that name, but I haven't read much Isaac Asimov. I've never read it, no.
Oh, he is one of the best. And this book was about humans had figured out time travel, but of course they could only travel back in time to when it was created, and they go throughout their timeline, which spans tens of thousands of years, maybe 60, 70,000 years or something like that, and they tinker with history to move history with the greatest effect to get humans back on a course they consider positive, and they do it with the smallest ripples possible. So they try to stop a war by someone breaks a pencil and they don't have a writing instrument there for when they come up with some equation for a missile, stuff like that. Right. So that I wonder about that a lot. Like if so of course you said these beings are on a parallel timeline. It's not necessarily us proper from the future coming back, but they're on a parallel timeline, and DNA, the genetic material is compatible. At least there's some interbreeding, and they use us. And I thought of The End of Eternity. What's interesting about The End of Eternity is, of course, one of the people that's a character in the book, he's the one that goes back in time to create time travel. So it's a future time travel guy creating time travel. Oh. But there's this section of history that they cannot enter, and it's about 20,000 years long. And that is a group of humans that have decided that time travel is bad. So for some reason they can go before and after. And when they finally get into this time, they find out. Now, I'm sorry, this is a big spoiler alert because I am ruining the book, but fuck it. It's still a great read. You know, I could ruin, The Matrix for you, and you're still going to watch The Matrix. So these humans, they want to stop the humans outside on either side of this timeline from inventing time travel, because this obsession with going back and forth through time and fixing your own history means that they miss a very important window to get technologically advanced enough to propagate the stars. And if they miss that window, another species out there has the chance to create a galactic civilization that puts up the fences and says, you can't go past here, this is our territory. And so I wonder if there's any type of implications like that with these guys. Do they worry about traveling through time and screwing with stuff, or are they not that concerned with it?
I don't think they're that concerned with it. I don't know how much of that they do now as well. Like, they're content here. In a sense, they're sort of, like I said, they're piloting reality and sort of sending this reality, maybe you could see it as like down certain favorable paths to them or whatever. I'm not quite sure if the ones that are now here permanently still try to jump over elsewhere and then come back and things like that, or whether they're just satisfied with this is what they were after. And also, the way that they do it, it defeats those kinds of, like, the grandfather paradox and things like that, because they're not really, like, if you'll go back in time and kill your own grandfather, you would never have been born to, do it in the first place. And these kinds of paradoxes that come up with sort of like linear time travel, the idea that time's a stream and you're jumping along the same timeline, and the paradoxes involved with that. They miss that kind of stuff by not going into their own past, by just sort of leaping around into alternative worlds. So it's a bit more like Rick and Morty, maybe, where they're jumping like that, So really they're interdimensionals, I suppose you'd say, maybe time travel in that more pure, old-fashioned sense of going up and down in one timeline. Maybe that's just impossible. I mean, I don't know, but that's not what they do anyway. Yeah.
So
that's a cool idea, by the way. I'll have to have a look into that. Now I know the ending, though.
It's not a, you know what? Well, actually, it is a surprise. I didn't ruin the biggest surprise, so that's okay.
Okay, cool.
And so, what came first? Really, so you sound like you're well versed in sci-fi, alien flicks, paranormal experiences. What was it? This interest in? I mean, was it your experiences drove an interest towards sci-fi, paranormal experiences, or was it an interest in this genre or literature that made you realize and start thinking of your experiences in a different way?
My older brother, who's 12 years older than me, he was a big sci-fi fan. And he exposed me to sci-fi when I was really young, as well. I have always thought of sci-fi as being interesting, as being a way of, like tossing around sort of like philosophical theories and speculations and stuff like that as to what if, this, what if that. And I have had an interest in the idea of possible alien worlds and things like that for a long time, but I was more interested in the fairy kind of elf kind of thing, really, for the first part of my life more. And sci-fi was sort of like a side thing. I was sort of more of a fantasy nerd, maybe, or something like that, like more high fantasy kind of, Tolkien kind of stuff, or pre-Christian religion in Europe and fairies and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I do find that because I have ended up taking an interest in sci-fi at a later stage, perhaps when I was in my mid-teens, I sort of got more interested in science fiction movies and stuff like that. And I was a big fan of Blade Runner. Blade Runner really pushed my buttons. Philip K. Dick and also William Gibson were probably my favorite authors when I was a teenager. And so the cyberpunk kind of stuff I was a fan of there.
Sorry, I'm gonna have to stop you right here. All right, not too many people I have on the show have actually read some Philip K. Dick. What are your favorite Philip K. Dick books? He's absolutely my number one everything. I love this guy.
I like Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, which is the book that Blade Runner was based on. There's the Stigmata of Palmer Eldritch.
Yes,
you've read that one.
Yep.
It's another good one, and the Varlas books and things like that. I think that sometimes they're not popular necessarily with some hardcore PK Dick fans,
which is strange because it's some of his best work. His last book, Radio Free Abelmuth. It's only because it's the most recent one I've read. I'm not going to say it's my favorite, but it's incredible. I loved every page of that book.
Yeah. That's it's good stuff. But Philip K. Dick, he just broke new ground in my opinion with the speculation, the philosophizing about the possibility of different worlds and artificial worlds and all this kind of stuff. Like he was, I suppose you officially when it comes to labeling Philip K. Dick I suppose he's sort of like pre-cyberpunk. Certainly the movie Blade Runner is considered to be cyberpunk, but I think Philip K. Dick's writings, I mean, maybe you'll know better than I do whether, I think he officially sort of is just a little bit before cyberpunk, but he, engendered cyberpunk. I reckon, like like William Gibson wouldn't have existed, and he wrote, the Sprawl trilogy. What are they called? Neuromancer was his first novel in the 80s. But I reckon there wouldn't have been a William Gibson if there hadn't have been a Philip K. Dick. They're very different writers, really, but that kind of idea of there being virtual realities, simulations of realities, worlds relying on something outside them for their own existence, so that's the and just trippy stuff, like PK Dick. I mean, he was a speed addict there for a big chunk of his life, and I'm sure he did a lot of other stuff as well, but just so freaking prolific, just pouring that stuff out. I'm a big fan of the book and also the film version of A Scanner Darkly as well. And that was based on a period of his life. I'm pretty sure I'm right in saying, where he had a bit of a writer's block. He didn't really write for a couple of years there, and he lived in this house that he had as an open house, and he allowed homeless people and all different kinds of people to just crash there, all different kinds of people doing weird and wonderful chemicals and all this stuff. And he sort of just put up with all of these people. And then after that drought, once all that was over, he wrote A Scanner Darkly, which is sort of based, inspired anyway by that sort of weird session of a couple of years of his life where he was just surrounded by all of these colorful characters doing all these different kinds of things. But yeah, he's definitely a good one, Philip K. Dick. I'd recommend to anyone to really get stuck into that. And it's amazing. Like if people read now Philip K. Dick that had never experienced him before, they might think that he's derivative or something. Like you might be tempted to read it and go, "Oh, this has been done. This has been done before." But he's the dude who started this stuff. Heaps of it. And especially film, cinema and stuff like that. So many. I mean, some of his stories have been turned into television and film and things like that. Like The Man in the High Castle. There's a TV series of that these days and stuff. But a lot of films. I mean, The Matrix itself would never have existed if there hadn't been a Philip K. Dick. The Matrix movies and whatnot. But there it is.
Yeah, and what I really love about Philip K. Dick is he creates these universes that, so a lot of the times, especially in his era, the future or alien worlds were high-tech, shiny. Everybody had access to the best of the best, and you thought everybody just kind of lived like that. His shit is real down to earth. It's gritty. It's, they're in the Connaught with 1,000 other occupants, and the coffee machine isn't working because his credits ran out, and his fridge is shit the bed, and the flying car just barely made it to work today. The average everyday guy, the anti-hero. And some of the real trippy shit that he was writing back in the 50s, unheard of. Oh God, I'm blanking on the name right now. Oh shoot, it's one of my favorites too. But it's basically, it feels like an acid trip in a lot of different ways. Reality dissolving in front of him. But it turns out this guy is actually someone who he worked for the government creating missiles to wage nuclear war against an alien species on the moon, and he was gonna.
This sounds familiar. Is this a short story or was it a novel?
No, it was a full length novel.
Okay. Yeah.
And what happened is he was going to stop doing his work, so they forced him into a virtual reality where he was living in everyday normal town 1955 instead of 2020 or whatever it was supposed to be, and they had him like doing a crossword puzzle that or like a specific puzzle that he would enter into a newspaper for a contest, and he would win every day. But it turned out he was working on the different missile coordinates to hit on the moon, just like crazy shit. And he gets out. It's kind of like the Truman Show. I think the Truman Show, subconsciously through the because everyone in his reality was fictional, and he starts figuring that out. And this is the 50s, you know what I mean? So it's like the Matrix, Truman Show, both on acid though, and you can't tell which one you're watching. That's kind of like what this is. And totally ahead of his time. I absolutely, I could sit here and geek out about Philip K. Dick all night, really. But Ryan, I want to. I'm going to let you go. We've been at this for a while. I don't want to keep you too late. Although it's late here. You're in Australia. It must be midday.
Yeah, it's 1:45.
1:45, man. I can't. Are you a day
in the
ahead?
Afternoon?
I was arguing with somebody at work about this today. Are you a day ahead or behind?
Ahead, yeah. I'm in the future, living in the future, dude. It's Friday.
It's Friday? Oh, my God.
Friday, 1:44 p.m. Yeah.
I wish it was Friday. Yeah, and there was one other thing I wanted to mention before you go. You have a sick beard. I'm not going to brag or nothing. I got a sick beard. So this is the second episode in a row that I've had people on with sick beards. And, sir, is that a do-rag? you got on your head?
It's a what do they call them? No, it's a what's that brand? Buff. Like it's just sort of like it's like a Thneed. Like it's just a hat you can tie into different shapes and stuff. People wear them a lot, like in sport, like running and stuff like that. Yeah, it's just sort of like a head condom.
Yeah. No, I just
All
wanted
purpose.
to anybody that's that's listening to this and not watching it, dope ass beard, nice little headgear. And I want everybody to go check out his book. And Ryan, where can everybody
Thanks, man.
find anything? Do you have a website? Anything to point people to?
I've got my only online presence is my YouTube channel. So I'm not on social media other than that anymore and things like that. But so my YouTube channel is just my name. And if anyone wants to say good day, if they have any questions or any stories or anything like that they want to share, my email address is in the about section of my YouTube channel. So yeah, drop me a line. And my book. Yeah, I'll quickly plug the book if that's cool, Jay.
100%.
It's just on Amazon. Children of Orion, Finding the Cryptoterrestrials, published by Flying Disc Press. Paperback, hardback, and an ebook. And I'm working on another book. And Philip Mantle, the dude at Flying Disc Press, has said, yeah, he'll publish the next book early next year. So I've been really getting stuck into that as well. So that's all groovy. So thanks so much for having me, man.
No, thank you a million times for coming on, Ryan. This has been incredible. You answered about 10% of the questions that I had because we didn't have enough, that we weren't speaking fast enough. And if anybody wants to check out his book, it will be in the description or in the show notes, whichever platform you're listening on. And Ryan, thanks a million for coming on, dude.
Well, cheers, Jay. It's been great fun, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you.